I'm so thankful to vegan community for having me give this talk. I know it's a busy time of the year, and it's also the time that, we have a lot of family gatherings, and anybody out there that's considering going plant-based, some questions oftentimes come up about exactly how to navigate the transition and also what are some of the social challenges for new vegans. So this is just going to be kind of an introductory session that I hope you will find to be helpful. So oftentimes I stress to people that the vegan journey is something to be celebrated. And it's really an exciting time, to rediscover food, find out more about yourself, reflect on your own life. So it really is something to be celebrated as a time of exploration. There might be some questions to ask yourself as you're starting out, such as, why do I want to go vegan? What are some of the benefits that I hope to gain? What are some aspects of my current diet that maybe I want to change? What challenges might I expect in going plant-based? So it's a good idea to periodically circle back to these questions and remembering that if you decide you're going to explore veganism, it's never about trying to reach some objective state of perfection. It's really just about exploring ways to enhance so many areas of your life, including diet, the environment, and how you see yourself in relation to other animals on the planet. One thing to realize at the start is that you already eat many plant based foods. So, one exercise I always recommend to folks is that they simply take a few minutes and jot down a list of foods that you eat that are already vegan. So, for instance, some of these might be pasta, if you're a pasta lover, rice, beans, salad, veggies, fruits, nuts, seeds, hummus, nut butters. Think of what you eat for breakfast: oatmeal, cereals, breads, even lots of snack foods, condiments, juices, coffee, tea, and so on. So oftentimes people think, oh gosh, I'm going to go vegan. That means I need to change my whole diet. Well, really, when you look at the foods you're already eating that are plant based, you've already set the foundation, and it's simply about expanding and diversifying what you eat. It's really important to go at your own pace. This is not a race. Some people actually shift their diets overnight. For others, they feel that given whatever circumstances they are in with family, cultural conditions, and things like that, it's best to do it gradually, step by step. So I can't stress this enough that go at a pace that's comfortable for you. And it's always about having this mindset of being optimistic and saying, hey, this is something fun. I'm exploring. I'm seeing what my relationship to food has been and how I feel comfortable with changes I might make. And remind yourself that every time you sit down to a plant based meal, you are making a difference. So, being optimistic, patient with yourself, being open and flexible. I think it's so important to have that background of positive mindset. You want to begin by setting the stage. Now, I'm a university professor, so for me, education is everything. So I can't stress enough the importance of learning everything you can to acquire basic knowledge and information. It might be about nutrition and might be about how our current agricultural systems affect the environment. You'll find that there is so much information out there just online, interviews, websites. There's a lot of documentaries that have come out. Lots of folks are posting blogs. There's simply so much to learn. So, educating yourself is oftentimes a great first step. I myself, I have a notebook where I jot down important information. It might be about nutrition, about shopping. I might have a notebook or a digital file where I keep track of my growing repertoire of meals. So being strategic and grounding it in education is so critical. I also want to mention there is a yearly conference that I speak at that is probably the biggest gathering of vegan forward-looking folks and those that are just starting out on their plant-based journey, and it's called Vegan Summerfest, and it's organized by the North American Veg Society. There are tons of speakers there, all the top plant-based docs. That's a really immersive kind of conference where you can learn so much. So again, it's all about education. And I've already talked about a notebook, whatever feels comfortable to you. I think it's really a helpful thing to journal and keep track of, well, gee, how is my diet going? What changes am I noticing? Shall I jot down some information about, medical checkups? Like a lot of people who first go vegan will notice that they they've improved so much with their health, with their blood work. And also just kind of reflections about how it's perhaps changing you as a person. So reflecting, journaling is another really helpful thing for your vegan journey. And there are so many ways to find support. There's a lot of meetup groups, there's Facebook groups, community vegan societies, there's cooking classes, conferences just like the one I mentioned, and veg fests are popping up in all major cities all around the world. So that's a great way to just find support and, as always, continue to be educated. There are also a couple programs I want to mention that are very popular for new vegans. One is called Challenge 22, and the other one is sponsored by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, also known as PCRM. Again, that's the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. That's headed by Dr. Neil Barnard, one of the great pioneers of vegan eating. PCRM has a 21-day vegan kickstart, and you can find out about that by checking it online. So one thing I usually recommend for people that want to start immersing themselves in a plant-based lifestyle is to do kind of just a 2 to 3 week flexible exploration of vegan dishes. There's no one or best way to go vegan. But the sooner you start exploring it, you're going to find how easy it is and what the benefits are. So the goal could be during this 2 to 3 week exploration to come up with 12 plant-based dishes. And you can start with dishes or recipes you have that are already vegan. For instance, a real easy one would be your favorite oatmeal with plant-based milk, some fruit, some cinnamon. A lunch dish example might be pasta with veggies, or maybe bean burritos. There's lots of dishes you are already eating that you can add to your list of a dozen plant-based dishes. One of the easiest thing to do is what we call veganizing. And that's where you take one of your favorite dishes and use simple substitutions to make it vegan. It couldn't be easier. For instance, go on Google, type in the name of a dish, for instance, mac and cheese, followed by the word veganize, and tons of recipe options are going to pop up. So it's not that you need a total overhaul of your cooking skills. Oftentimes, substitutions, making changes, one swap out of one ingredient for another, you can veganize a lot of your favorite dishes. Next, this is where the fun comes in. There are so many terrific cookbooks out there, vegan websites, all kinds of recipes. You know, the nowadays you don't even need to buy a cookbook, just go online. You can find so many great recipes. Say there's some certain ingredients you want to put into a vegan dish. You could type into Google broccoli, pasta, easy, vegan dinner, and dozens of recipes will come up. You can even narrow down your search with modifiers. For instance, no oil, gluten free, sugar free, that sort of thing. So you can really get some fantastic ideas. And of course, like with any kind of cooking, it's about being adventurous, trial and error. I've had many times, both during my vegan time now, of course, and ages ago when I still consumed animal products. Some recipes are simply not going to work out. That's okay. You go forth and explore others. So the next step would be to go fully vegan in 28 days. So 3 to 4 weeks is kind of a recommended length of time to give your body the chance to transition over. And again, everyone does it at their own pace. It depends a lot on, how busy your schedule is. You might find that trying to do it over the summer where maybe your responsibilities with work are less demanding, that might be easier for you. So this is just kind of a general guideline, and there's different ways you can do it. So this chart is one recommended way. You could start out with week 1 to make all your breakfast meals plant-based. Week 2, in addition to breakfast, make all your lunches plant-based. Week 3, continue by adding plant-based dinner meals every day. By the time you're at week 4, all your meals will be vegan. So that's one way to organize it. Another way could be to make all your meals plant-based on 2 days of the week. For example, Sunday and Monday. And then the second week, you add 2 more days. The third week, you add 2 more days. And then week 4, you add in the final day. And you don't even need to do it necessarily in this specific of a plan. You might just kind of be flexible with deciding which meals you want to make vegan, keeping in mind an overall goal that by the end of the month, you pretty much want everything to be vegan. And that would include snacks too. So, some practical tips for meal planning. You've probably seen some of these diagrams around, and it's super helpful to think of a plate. And the plate can represent everything that you eat. And the goal is to fill it with a diversity of healthy plant foods. The basic outline is the same. Basically, half of what you eat should be vegetables and fruits. Then another quarter would be your grains and starches, and the remaining quarter would be your proteins, which would be things like tofu, tempeh, beans, nut-based butters, and so forth. Unfortunately, some of you may have heard that in our country, in the US, that is, we have what's called the standard American diet, also known as SAD. The standard American diet. This is really kind of, I think, shocking that 85% of your typical American diet consists of animal products and highly processed foods. Only about 1 in 10 Americans are getting enough vegetables, fruits, nuts, and beans, and only 4% whole grains. So you can see how this diagram shows how the American diet is tipped towards very processed and unhealthy animal products. So here are some more helpful food tips. Kind of think about this in a very general way that when you're creating your meals, you want to eat your food as close to its natural state as possible. You want to minimize unhealthy, ultra processed foods in favor of whole foods. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Michael Clapper, who is one of the foremost plant based physicians in this country. He's actually making a trip to many hospitals where, unbelievably, doctors are not trained in nutrition. So he's getting the word out about what entails healthy eating. Now, we do see a lot of items in the grocery store, Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat, all of those things. A lot of these plant-based items that will substitute for your hamburger, sausages, etc. Those are fine to use once in a while as transitional foods, but they tend to be very high in salt, using a lot of oil, and a lot of added sugars. So Dr. Clapper uses this thing called SOS, salt, oil, sugar. When you're reading your labels, and we'll get to that in just a minute, you want to avoid all those unhealthy additives. So eating food as close to its natural state as possible. Eat the rainbow is another thing to keep in mind. All of the different colors of produce, fruits, and veggies you see in the grocery store, those represent all of the variety of phytonutrients, phyto meaning plant, and antioxidants that you get from eating plant-based. So eating a diversity of plant foods will give you all the nutrients that you need. You can find multiple ways to use ingredients throughout the week. Like you might use, a red pepper in a salad. You might use it in a chili. You might use it in a stir fry. Cook up large quantities, and you can even freeze them. For instance, if you love casseroles, soups, and stews, cooking up large quantities is a real time saver. And you can maximize and use a large variety of plant foods in just a single dish. For instance, we already talked about oatmeal. With your oatmeal, you can add in a small apple, half a banana, blueberries, some nuts, some cinnamon, some ground flax. I have a friend who even adds beans and nut butter to his oatmeal, and that just makes for a super soupy, super healthy meal to start the day. You know, vegans are often teased about eating salads, but one of the healthiest things you can do is to put together a large salad that's packed with nutrients. This picture shows, how you can add all kinds of veggies and beans and nuts, avocado, fruit, hemp seeds, sunflower seeds, cucumbers. And I always drizzle my salad, since I don't use oil. You can just throw together a wonderful salad dressing using a little vinegar and some orange juice. What can be easier than that? Stews and soups are also terrific ways to include several of your favorite veggies, grains, legumes, and spices. And we all know that bowls, these are so-called monk bowls, are real popular items. And they're a great way to combine a whole grain, a plant protein, and lots of veggies. And again, it's fun with these because you can just totally improvise. And learn how easy it is to make foods that are healthier and considerably cheaper than store-bought versions. For instance, hummus. If you've got a food processor, it's super easy to make. Nut butters, sauces, I mentioned salad dressings already. Um, and especially with pasta sauces, like typically pasta sauces you buy at the store tend to be really high in salt. So that's one area where it's really very easy to throw together some tomato sauce, some whole tomatoes, mushrooms, all kinds of wonderful ingredients to make your own pasta sauces. There are now even a number of excellent nut milk machines on the market. I have one of these where you simply throw in almonds, water, turn it on, and voila, you have almond milk. And the machine I have is even self-cleaning. So there are lots of ways you can explore making wonderful plant-based ingredients and items at home. And if you're a gardener, depending, of course, on your geography and climate, try growing your own food. Like here in Virginia, in the US where I am, I grow tomatoes every year. You can even grow some produce in containers to make it easier. Last year, I even bought a couple full spectrum lights and I was growing kale in my house. That way I didn't have to worry about the bugs outside that were eating the plants. So this is another fun way to, explore growing your own food, which is really a very satisfying thing to do. Okay, some shopping tips. So as with any kind of grocery shopping, it's helpful to plan every week's meals with a single shopping list if you can do that. And remember that mainstream grocery stores often have their own lower priced brands of stock items. It could be pasta, it could be a pasta sauce, breads, even some of the vegan cheeses, sour cream, those kinds of items. Oftentimes, mainstream grocery stores will have all these things. You don't have to necessarily go to a specialty store. Organic produce means these products were grown without the use of harmful pesticides, herbicides, and synthetic fertilizer. Now, I know sometimes it's hard to remember, oh, what am I supposed to buy organic? What do I not have to buy organic? Kind of a general rule to remember is that it's best to buy your leafy produce organic due to the large surface area that gets sprayed. And these leafy greens, of course, are what you eat. So things like kale and lettuce and spinach. All berries, again, you eat the whole berry, apples, cherries, celery, peppers, tomatoes, peaches, pears, they have thin skins and you tend to eat the skins. So those you generally should buy organic. There are items, on the other hand, that have very thick skins, so the absorption of pesticide is not as much, and those would include produce such as avocados, bananas, pineapple, melons, oranges. And then there are some items that simply tend to not have a high pesticide content, and they are fine to not buy organic. And generally, those produce items are asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, onions, and cabbage. I don't know if any of you have heard of this organization called the Environmental Working Group, also known as EWG. And every year they actually produce an updated list of produce items you should buy organic or it's not necessary to buy organic. So you might want to check them out. So I'm sure we've all seen these code numbers on produce, and it's really helpful to know what these numbers mean because they're standardized by the International Federation for Produce Standards. If the number begins with a 3 or 4, it means that it was conventionally grown, which means most likely sprayed with pesticides. This picture shows some apples, and you see that the code starts with a 9. So that means that that particular item is organic. So if you're shopping for organic produce, look for the number 9 that starts your code. In general, frozen or canned fruits and veggies are just as nutritious as buying them fresh, as most of these are processed at maximum ripeness. And frozen produce is great because then you can buy fruit, for instance, when it's not in season. Frozen produce is a great thing to grow into, to toss into your green smoothies. In general, with canned fruits and veggies, watch for added sugar or salt. And oftentimes it helps to rinse out those products. The salt is added simply as a kind of preservative, so it's best to rinse those out. Those of you that live either in Germany or in the US, there's a lot of discount stores that have great prices, such as Aldi, Lidl, and on the West Coast, there's Grocery Outlet. And Asian markets oftentimes carry a huge variety of inexpensive produce. Although I've noticed they don't necessarily indicate if it's organic or not, but you can find a great variety of different kinds of mushrooms and greens that you would not find in a normal grocery store. Also, see if your local grocery store has a section of marked down, slightly blemished produce, such as in this picture here, bananas. So these are great for tossing into your smoothies. So that's something else to be on the lookout for. Okay, so as a beginning vegan, and for anybody actually, you want to learn how to read food labels. So if you look at this label, at the bottom it talks about DV, which is the daily value, the percentage of daily value. If you see a percentage that's 20% or more, that means a high amount. So this particular item, I don't remember where I got this particular label from. You can see that it's high in dietary fiber, which is a good thing. And you see that it has 0% of the daily value of added sugars. So that's good. So remember, 20% is high, 5% or below is considered low. So for instance, we've talked a lot about pasta sauce. Oftentimes you'll look at a jar of pasta sauce, flip it over, and you see the sodium content, and it could be like 28%. So typically you do not want to buy that particular pasta sauce. Now, another thing, another handy thing to know about with grains, rice, and pasta, you want to try to eat whole grain. That means that the whole grain has been kept intact. So you're getting the fiber and all of the nutrients out of that wheat or rice, for instance. Look at this label again. If you take the percentage of the carbohydrates, in this case it's 4, and divide it by the percentage of dietary fiber. So 4 divided by 21. If that number is 5 or less, then that product is a whole grain. So just remember that. Divide carbs by fiber. If it's 5 or less, that will be a whole grain. Now, sometimes it's a little tricky because with breads, sometimes manufacturers add molasses or something to make it look browner and less white. So that's why you really want to look at these percentages. But generally, the whiter a bread looks, probably the more unnutritious it is. And a couple other things to know, multi-grain doesn't necessarily mean that it's whole grain. We think of something being multi-grain, oh yeah, that must be super healthy, but not necessarily. Again, you want to read the label. And one comment I want to make about oil, because people say, well, I'm not using animal fats, I'm using plant-based oil. Isn't that better for me? Well, yes, it's true that the saturated fat content of oils is substantially better than animal fat, but all fats, whether plant or animal, have 9 calories per gram. This is from Dr. Neil Barnard. He stresses this constantly. He says that a tablespoon of, say, olive oil, that's 120 calories. So you really want to avoid or minimize the use of oil. A lot of products in the grocery store have a vegan logo. This is one called Certified Vegan, vegan.org, and it's from an organization that's actually based in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. The organization is called Vegan Action. And if you see this on a product, it's a certification that the product indeed is vegan. Okay, so now at this point, we're going to turn to social challenges. And these are questions that commonly come up in terms of, well, I'm a new vegan. What kinds of things do I need to be concerned with? And even as a longtime vegan, I still constantly find myself in certain situations where I need to know how to navigate my interactions with other people. And vegans experience a wide range of reactions. Some non vegans will be super supportive, but then others may engage in hostile behavior, even, or they may even joke about things. So, this can be a difficult thing for a vegan who's just starting out because, of course, going vegan is an important decision for many of us, and we want to maintain our positive interactions with friends and family. And we've also acquired so much information, and we're so eager to share it with everyone. So, one word of advice I always give to people in social situations, and that's to remember that at one point, for most of us, we were not vegan, right? For a lot of people, the idea of going vegan has not even occurred to them. It's not been in their sphere of awareness. A lot of people still don't even know what vegan means. They get vegan and vegetarian mixed up, for instance. And another thing to remember in general is that even if we're engaging with others and the interaction is not necessarily as positive as you may like it to be, we are already planting a seed of awareness in that person's mind that, hey, you know, this vegan thing is real. There are people who are vegan. And that's a starting point of awareness. It's so important that, again, we remind ourselves that we were once non vegans and that we approach our interactions like we would any other conversation. It's not about trying to prove we're right, becoming argumentative, or pointing out someone else's flaws. It's about having a positive interaction. We can also remember that sometimes people feel, in a way, threatened by some vegans because they have this kind of stereotypical idea that somehow we're self-righteous, like we've got it all right, and we're trying to change people. So sometimes people can be defensive as well. So maintaining the idea that communication is always a two-way street. And what I oftentimes do is see myself as a model for what veganism can do. One thing you'll find after you've been vegan for a while, and your health will probably improve, I get comments all the time. Like people say, oh, what do you do to keep so healthy? You never get sick. Or, wow, you look fantastic. You look like, 10 years younger than your real age. Or, what do you do to have so much energy? I think just being a positive model is one of the best ways that we can spread the vegan message. And in our interactions, we might tell people, well, going vegan helped me in this way, showing how it has benefited you. There's a wonderful quote by vegan psychologist Claire Mon, and she puts it best when she says, quote, "The best thing a vegan can do is to be a great example of a happy, adjusted, open-minded, caring person who also happens to be vegan." So I think that incorporating the idea that our being vegan is just one aspect of the wonderful person that we are, and that sends an important message. So I wanted to go through some specific scenarios that I've gone through or that some of you may find yourselves in. So the first one is that you're invited to a meal or social gathering at someone's home where the hosts do not realize you are vegan. So, what do? The best thing to do is to contact the host ahead of time and let them know you are vegan. They may offer to include a vegan dish. Or even better, you can offer to bring along a vegan dish or maybe sides, plant-based sides. So that way you're actually contributing to the event. Another situation could be that you're invited to a potluck or a social gathering where everybody's bringing food. So this is a fantastic opportunity to bring one of your favorite dishes. And what I do oftentimes, and this is so much fun, I have this favorite vegan lasagna recipe where it uses tofu as a substitute for ricotta cheese. You add a lot of spices and nutritional yeast to it. And you take it to the potluck, and of course, people will rave about your dish. And then you can kind of say off to the side, oh, yeah, well, that was vegan. And they go, what? So a lot of people, they have this preconception that vegan food is not going to be delicious. So a potluck is a great way to show them how delicious vegan food can be. Another scenario might be that you're invited to a gathering of friends at a restaurant. Now, nowadays, more and more restaurants offer vegan options. So it's again about planning ahead. Call the restaurant ahead of time, check out the menu online. You can oftentimes find those posted. You could call to find out more information. For example, there's two food situations where animal products may be included that you may not be aware of. One is the use of animal stock in a tomato sauce, whether it's on a pizza or in a pasta dish. Another one might be at an Asian restaurant where oftentimes fish sauce is used. So I would call ahead. So, for instance, if I'm going to a gathering with friends at an Asian restaurant, I'll call them and say, "Do you have any dishes that are vegan?" And say, "I want to make sure these don't have oyster sauce or fish sauce. Or can your chef create a dish that does not have animal stock in it?" So, really planning ahead of time and making contact with a restaurant is really, really helpful. I'll never forget, I went to a conference a couple years ago, and there was nothing vegan on the menu. And my husband and I talked to the chef and said, "Hey, what do you think you could throw together?" And it was one of the best vegan meals I ever had. So sometimes kitchen chefs love the opportunity to improvise and come up with new creations, and you're educating them in the process. Also, speaking of conferences and receptions, oftentimes now, because there are so many people with special food needs, whether it's vegetarian, vegan, gluten free, and so on, oftentimes there's an option to make a vegan meal request in advance. And once you arrive at that conference, what I normally do, say it's an evening dinner, I will find the head chef or whoever is circulating around the room, and I'll say to them, "Hey, by the way, I'm the one that ordered that vegan meal," just as a reminder so they know where you're sitting and that kind of thing. Okay, This one is a little bit more tricky. This is where you have non-vegan guests or family visiting your home for a few days. And in this case, it's so important to let folks know ahead that you have a vegan household. And when in the home, you're going to be cooking vegan. This way, they know ahead of time. If for some reason they prefer not to eat just plant-based, this gives them the opportunity to perhaps choose another place to stay. Could be an Airbnb where they do their own cooking, or they may stay at a hotel near a restaurant where they can eat. I think it's really important that you make that very clear ahead of time. You don't want to have a situation where family comes and then all of a sudden you have this conflict. Do whatever you can to minimize the conflict ahead of time. Now, I do want to point out that sometimes you're placed in situations where you have to compromise a little bit. And I've got a perfect example. My mom was visiting me here, I guess it was several years ago, and we went out to a Chinese restaurant, and of course, my husband and I, we ordered vegan dishes, and my mom ordered a dish that had chicken, which was totally fine. It was at a restaurant. Then she had leftovers and she had it put in, one of these containers and brought it home. Now, at that point, I wasn't going to say to my mom, no, you can't take that home. You have to eat it all in the restaurant. I just felt it wasn't worth the conflict, the potential tension and difficulty that would arise. So she ate the leftovers in my home and I just kind of left it at that. So sometimes we do have to compromise and be flexible a little bit, and those situations can arise. So, what do you do if someone is outright confrontational about your veganism? You really have to kind of gauge the situation. With some people, it's easy to talk with them about why you made the choice. In other situations, you just may decide for your own mental health, I just do not want to engage with this person anymore, in which case you might politely say, I'm sorry, I'm finding it difficult to talk about this, doing it in as gracious a manner as possible. If someone is curious about why you're vegan, that gives you an opening to talk perhaps in more detail. So you really have to gauge where their interest is in terms of how you respond. One of the most common questions I've gotten, because I do a lot of traveling, I go to conferences, I'm a guest artist as a musician at a university, and someone takes me out to lunch, they see that I'm vegan and perhaps they're not, and the question I get all the time is, you don't mind if I eat meat, do you? So I have found that one way to handle that particular question is to say, I'm curious, why did you ask me that question? And by putting the question back on them, that right away opens the door to a real conversation. Perhaps that person is saying, hey, I've heard a lot about this vegan thing. What can you tell me about it? And that gives you an opportunity to discuss how it's benefited you, to talk about what your motivations are, and engage in this back and forth. And remembering that it's always a two-way street. Even if you encounter that negative scenario where someone is really pushing back, sometimes I think that happens because that person, perhaps deep down inside, they realize that there's something about their food choices that maybe they should be changing. And sometimes, I've talked to other vegan advocates, sometimes it's that person who pushed back the most who eventually went vegan. So again, you never know how you are planting those seeds of awareness in people's minds. Kind of another awkward situation since we just passed Thanksgiving is being invited to a gathering. Now, if you are totally uncomfortable, you do not want to be at a table where an animal is on the plate on the Thanksgiving table, you may make the decision and say, "I'm sorry, I'm not able to come." I've known some vegans that have done that. Um, you may, on the other hand, bring extra side dishes that are vegan, and that's another way. I was a couple weeks ago in Boston where I had Thanksgiving. My older sister is vegan, but her husband is not. He cooked a chicken for himself. I just did not look at the chicken. I just ate my own vegan meal. I did not make a fuss about it. But again, this has to be a personal decision for you. Um, if someone makes fun of you for being vegan, and sometimes, you get these statements like, "Oh, you only eat salad, don't you?" And if they're kind of joking about it, I think it's good for you to be lighthearted as well. And you might say something in response like, "Well, yeah, we eat salads, but we eat a lot of other great food that's delicious too." Keep it very lighthearted. Again, it's a matter of gauging the situation. And then kind of the last couple things, if you're living with someone who is not vegan, that's something, again, personally, you have to decide on your own if that is something you are comfortable with or not. Some people who live like spouses, where, say, the wife is vegan and the husband is not, I've known women who would have specific refrigerator or freezer space for each person to keep them separate. You might even separate cookware and utensils. Um, and in situations like that, you might find opportunities to cook a vegan dish that everybody can share. So, again, ultimately, you really have to assess the practicality of a given situation according to your own personal values. And then the last thing, as I mentioned before, there are so many ways to find support. And this could include meetup groups, vegan societies online, where you can really share ideas with other people that have ideas about, gee, how do I deal with this social situation or this family member? We can really reach out and find supports from so many others. So those are some of the social challenges, and maybe when we do the Q&A, there may be other situations that some of you may come up with or solutions. So I'm just going to really briefly go through some aspects of veganism beyond food. Oftentimes, food is the first thing that we think of. But nowadays, of course, vegans avoid leather and leather shoes and accessories. You can find so many vegan shoes now, purses. Um, so much is out there, even materials made from cork and mushrooms. Cosmetics, hair and skin products, there's a lot more vegan products out there. Traveling. So this is the number one site everybody has to have. They have an app you can put on your phone, and it's called Happy Cow. And what you can do, no matter where you're traveling in the world, you could type in Barcelona, Spain, and Happy Cow will pull up all of the vegan restaurants, stores, all kinds of resources for anywhere in the world, all kinds of resources, even hotels. There are nowadays even vegan resorts and hotels for vegans. But Happy Cow is definitely something that every vegan has to have access to. Um, so with traveling, there's a lot of travel sites out there: vegan travel, veg visits, veggie hotels, the nomadic vegan. Lots of ideas for how to travel as a vegan. And when I'm traveling and I'm having to book a hotel in advance, I do a search to see, okay, is this hotel near a grocery store? Is it near, in the US, a Whole Foods grocery? Be strategic about where you're staying in terms of access to restaurants and stores. There's even these food delivery services. I think we've all heard about Purple Carrot. There's a whole bunch of these out there too. Travel is still a bit of a challenge. As we know in the US, you don't get meals on domestic flights anymore. Um, but international travel, airlines still provide vegan meals. However, you need to really research and find out what the labeling is because it is not the same from one airline to the other. Some will use the word vegan, but I've noticed others use a name called strict vegetarian, which is vegan. So you really have to research this carefully. Um, and one thing, of course, that's nice about ordering special meals is that you usually get your meal first. Airports overall do not rate really highly when it comes to finding vegan food. Oftentimes, I'll bring my own snack with me, and that's better than paying airport prices like $12 for a salad. Um, so you have to be a little strategic about saying, okay, I've got this long connection at so and so airport. Do a little poking online to see what some of the vegan food chains might be at that particular airport. But again, you need to plan ahead. And then there are discussion websites covering all aspects of veganism. You can go on Reddit. TripAdvisor is fantastic. And for foreign travel, there are actually a couple options. There's Vegan Passport and V Cards, where you can get typed out sentences of all the questions that you might want to ask in a restaurant. And I actually used to do this on my own because I study languages anyway, but you want to be able to, in the language of the country you're visiting, be able to explain, I don't eat so and so, or I don't eat animal products, or what do you have that is vegan on the menu. So you really, with a lot of planning, it's possible to travel vegan. And finally, I want to tell you about a couple books I have out there. One is called Vegan Voices. It's published by Lantern Publishing and Media, and it's an anthology of essays by 50 vegans around the world that gives you a unique look at how going vegan is a highly individual journey and a life-changing choice. So this is a great introductory book. It's even something that you can give to friends or family who maybe they don't quite understand, gee, why did you go vegan? Or maybe they're not sure how their journey's going to unfold when they go plant-based. This is a great book with input from 50 vegans around the world. And then with the same publishing company, next fall, I have a new book coming out called Vegan Made Easy, A Practical Guide to Plant-Based Living, which I'm co-authoring with award-winning vegan food scientist, Dr. Camila Perusello. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you so much for listening.